Friends, as I begin today, it's tempting to just do a pregnancy meditation. As we begin Advent, of course, we have two really good pregnancy stories. Mary, of course, who we'll read about next week, and Elizabeth, her cousin, the wife of Zechariah. Two miraculous pregnancies that left their parents awestruck. So, as I stand here with my own amount of awe and wonder at my own pregnancy that feels a little miraculous, I'm just tempted to wax poetic a bit for how beautiful it is to have a baby growing within, or maybe talk about what I'm doing to get ready for the birth. Advent is a season of getting ready, of course, and it just feels relatable, close at hand. But as miraculous as this may feel, it doesn't compare to the scope of this story. The Bible story before us today is about some extraordinary happenings, and to focus on relatability would be to play down how extraordinary these stories really are. There are times when we want to make the Bible stories relatable. We want to remember that Jesus was born among commoners and that he had to flee from persecution, that he had friends and family and went fishing with them, and that yes, he wept when he mourned. But to try to play the relatability game with this story, where an angel of God appears in the holiest of places with a message that strikes the receiver speechless, would be to miss the point entirely. You can't cozy up to the characters in this story. Watch out, or the high voltage strike of God's messenger in the temple will leave you speechless too. This story is told to get the point across that Jesus is so special that it takes an awe-striking angel to prepare the way for the person who will prepare the way for Jesus. And the gospel writer Luke here is showing us that even though Jesus came from an obscure backwater town, his story began in the center of the world, in the Jerusalem temple, the point where heaven touches earth. For the ancient Hebrew people, the Jerusalem temple was the navel of the whole universe as far as they could imagine, and it's here that the news comes. Zechariah, ministering in the temple, is the first to hear about their child John, who will make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And Zechariah gets a taste of John's personality in this prophecy, hearing that he will have the spirit and power of Elijah, another prophet, even before John is conceived with divine intervention. About that divine intervention, Elizabeth and Zechariah stand in a long line of stories from the Bible of people who struggled with infertility. The closest to Elizabeth in biblical example is Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel. And not just because they both experienced long infertility, but because they dedicated their new sons to God. They each promised that their child would never drink wine and possibly never even cut his hair either. It is really interesting to see that the song Hannah sang when she dedicated her son Samuel to God's service was really similar to the Magnificat that Mary will sing when she meets Elizabeth and receives Elizabeth's blessing. These are songs about the turning of the tables, casting down the mighty from their thrones and lifting up the lowly, about filling the poor with good things and sending the rich away empty. In a world where a woman's status was dependent on her childbearing, this really connects metaphorically to the arrival of an unexpected child. Because childlessness there could mean social exclusion, which would lead to poverty really quickly. It could certainly mean destitution in old age, when a typical retirement plan was just move in with your family. It's hard to know what life was really like for Elizabeth and how much her infertility had really affected her, but we do have a clue in verse 25, where she thanks God for taking away the disgrace she endured among the people. We also have a clue in verse 24, where it says she veiled herself, and this was not for shame. She veiled herself. Other translations might say she secluded herself, but I've been researching and I'm satisfied on the scholarship that says seclusion would be rather uncommon for a pregnant woman, while veiling was common for women of reproductive age. So possibly Elizabeth had stopped wearing a veil because she now had this status as an older woman. And since girls and older women did not always veil themselves, but when that changed, with this divine intervention, she had a change in social status. She went back to the clothes of a much younger woman. It really changed a lot for her. Now, I am grateful to live in a world pretty different from the biblical world described here, or at least I can say we're making progress. We do not now believe that parents are essentially different kinds of people from those who are childless, or that infertility or menopause should change your social status. No. And we applaud the calling of adoptive and foster parents, and we celebrate the lives and ministries of those who, for any reason, by circumstance or by choice, remain childless. I'm glad that we don't use different clothes to indicate our parental or sexual status in our society today. And I'm pretty glad, too, that if this story happened today, it might be Elizabeth serving as priest in the temple, not her husband. They were both of priestly lineage, the Bible notes, because we, at least here, have now made progress in accepting the leadership and service of people of all genders. I wonder if Elizabeth had received the appearance from Gabriel in the temple, I wonder if she would have understood and believed, or if she also would have found it so unbelievable that she was struck speechless. But I at least hope that today, if Elizabeth had spoken up at the baby's name ceremony and said the baby's name is John, that the people around her would have believed her, that she knew the name, instead of needing to get her still speechless husband to confirm it. Well, baby John will make himself known right away. He will leap in Elizabeth's womb to greet Jesus when Mary comes to visit. And although we don't know anything about John as a child, we know that by the time John is an adult, he is a strong personality, a radical prophet, the kind of prophet you can see coming and know he's a prophet, fresh from the wilderness. He will stand on the river and shout, "You brood of vipers," at the people, and the people will still flock to see what he has to say and do what he tells them to do. John is really going to be something special. There's going to be nothing relatable about him, really. He will stand out in a crowd. He will make himself known. He is the loud, crying messenger, calling out, "Make ready a people, prepared for the Lord. And so, even though it would feel nice to find something relatable in this story, to cozy up to the characters somehow, I think this story is a good one for this year. There are times, of course, when I do want to remember that Jesus was a child, physical and wet and warm. But this year, filled with danger and tragedy, this year it feels right to celebrate the birth of a child who is announced by a terrifying angel in the very seat of power, in the center of the universe as they knew it. This year that has been marked in our own halls of power by terrible abuses and uncaring leadership, this year we need God to arrive with prophets and shouts. We need to hear the voice of John the Baptist crying in the wilderness and telling people who are rich enough to own 2 coats that they should give one away to someone who has none. We need to hear the loud preaching of the forgiveness of sins, forgiveness we need badly. In a world where our sin, our foolishness, our greed, our failure to take even basic preventative measures for our neighbor's sake, our sin is on full display. We need the prophet who will call our hearts to one another, telling us to repent from our selfish ways and get ready for God to live among us. When Zechariah heard the good news, he couldn't believe it. It was too much for him to take in. Perhaps he is the one truly relatable part of this story. He just couldn't imagine such a big and wonderful thing happening. Many of us have gotten cynical and don't expect anything good to happen. There's nothing wrong with guarding your hearts, especially when you've been burned before. But this Advent, I'm hearing the call, the challenge to be open to a big surprise, to hope and even expect that God might burst into our world in a big way, raising up a loud prophet and calling us to repent from our sinful ways in a way that makes a difference. In a world filled with so much suffering, that would be good news indeed. May it be so.